These are some of the most expensive Nintendo consoles ever made. Though, if you're a shiny hunter, they might be worth a hit to your wallet. Back when these were first released in July of 2006, the Visteon Dockable entertainment system retailed for $1,300 US. After inflation, that would be like asking for nearly $1,950 just for a Nintendo Switch that you can hang from the roof of your car. Of course, the Nintendo Switch would be missing out on features such as the ability to play DVDs, compact discs, and Kodak picture CDs, so I'm sure the price point was reasonable. And since you could only purchase these through automotive retailers, most buyers were probably looking at wrapping it up into a multi-year loan anyways. So a game system for the back of the car to keep the kids quiet was possibly worth the investment. As such, the Visteon Gameboy was dubbed the ultimate backseat babysitter. After all, how would anybody be expected to play their Nintendo Game Boy Advance games on the go without one? Perhaps with the Nintendo DS Lite, the console that was released a month before the Visteon, could play DS and Game Boy Advance games and cost just 1/10 of the price? Well, the DS didn't have a cool Dorito-shaped wireless controller, so there were features on the Visteon that you couldn't find anywhere else. Regardless of what it was that sold people on the product, at least some of these systems made it out into the world. Which is lucky for us, because they're actually pretty neat. First, let's talk about this wacky controller. The Visteon used two different remotes. One was used for general functionality of the device, like switching inputs, using the DVD menus, skipping chapters, and accessing the settings. It also has a power button that can only be used to turn the system off, so turning the Visteon on can only be done with a physical power button. But the far more interesting remote is the one used for playing the Game Boy Advance games. The Visteon Dorito uses infrared to communicate with the system and is actually surprisingly responsive. I've managed to use the controller through layers of clothing, facing backwards, held up over my head, and even from over 25 feet away. Also, despite the fact that they look absolutely ridiculous, the controllers for the Visteon are actually fairly comfortable. Definitely an upgrade over a Game Boy Advance SP. Unfortunately, these controllers are somewhat difficult to find, and Game Boy games can't be played at all without them. Unlike the Game Boy Player, which allows users to play with the Game Boy as a controller, the Visteon will only take inputs from one of these wireless controllers. Luckily, if you can't find an OEM one, these Sky gamepads also work as full replacement controllers. As a Pokemon fan, what makes this controller super cool is that it isn't paired to any one system at a time, meaning that I can line up multiple Visteons at once and use them to shiny hunt. Look at this, 3 consoles, 1 controller. That should mean like 3 times the shiny Pokemon. Though 3 of these cost nearly half as much as a full 16 times GameCube setup, so unless every Wavebird in the world disappears, I wouldn't really recommend these as feasible shiny hunting machines. And although I've actually had these systems for over a year, I haven't found a single shiny on them. But that's probably just because I've only been using them to do one of the most difficult shiny hunts ever. For more info on that, be sure to subscribe to see how the hunt ends up, or follow us on Twitch to see the hunt live. Okay, so I said these were some of the most expensive Nintendo consoles of all time, but we've only talked about how much they used to cost. But even today in 2023, they can still sell for well over $500. And that's without even having the controller to use the darn things. So don't ask how much mine with the box and accessories cost. Let's say you do go ahead and grab one. What are you really getting? By default, you got the basics. The DVD remote, manual, a 4400 mAh battery, and the system equipped with a 10.2-inch display. Packaged outside of the box was the game controller and wireless headphones. Then, one of the most difficult pieces to find, and something I don't actually have, was the dock. Putting the Visteon into the dock flips the screen around and allows the use of the wireless headphones, which are unfortunately useless to me right now. The dock also allowed users to listen to the system's audio through their FM radio, which was a common feature of portable DVD players at the time. Without the dock, which is how I use my Visteons, the battery was rated to last about 2.5 hours when new, but mine last a fair bit less these days. Though I guess if bringing your dinky little DS to your friend's house wasn't enough of a flex, you could have brought one of these to enjoy the classic Generation 3 Pokemon games while everyone else played Diamond and Pearl. So the portability had purpose, I guess. Now let's talk about the Game Boy inside. The Visteon doesn't use just any old Game Boy Advance, but the board of a Game Boy Micro, a system that came out in 2005 and had one major limitation not present in the Game Boy Advance or the GBA SP. The Micro couldn't play regular Game Boy or Game Boy Color games, something that the designers were aware of since these older games will not fit into the cartridge slot, but was somehow mixed up when making the user's manual. While page 9 states that only games branded as Game Boy Advance are compatible with the Visteon, page 35 states that there are 4 types of game packs that work with the entertainment system. So which one is correct? I was curious to see if putting a Game Boy Color cartridge into the Visteon would work at all if I bypassed the physical restriction. While my Easy Flash Jr. is easily able to boot up on a standard GBA, it would not boot on the Micro or the Visteon at all. The Visteon would even reboot, acknowledging that a game pack was being detected, but it couldn't load the cartridge. Though this does show off one major upgrade from the Visteon over Nintendo's handhelds. If the game pack is removed, the system will reboot and wait for a new cartridge, instead of the terrible screeching we have all heard at least once, making this a valuable upgrade. And luckily, the Visteon can play GBA video unlike the Game Boy player. Diving further into the Game Boy functionality of the Visteon is something pretty neat. The side of the system features a fully functional link port. This can be used to trade Pokemon, receive Eon Ticket mystery gifts, and according to the manual, can even work in up to 4-player mode. One limitation that the port has is something that probably never would have come into play anyways, but is worth mentioning. And that's that the big fat-headed link cables like the ones used for the GBA to GameCube connection won't fit into the Visteon. But if you take the casing off, it's possible to get the connector to fit. I'm not sure why any normal person would ever need to do that, but it does allow you to do things like use the Visteon as a controller for the Game Boy player, so I guess that's a win? I'll probably stick to using my 3 very expensive Game Boys as standalone units though. Now that we all know a little more about the Visteon dockable entertainment system, how would you rate it? Honestly, I think it's pretty neat. I'd say it was definitely not worth the price tag that it was given when other portable DVD players cost around $400 to $500 at the time, and the fact that it was an entire generation behind certainly didn't help. Apparently, Visteon was in talks with Nintendo about making similar systems with Wii or DS support, but those never came to fruition. So, do you think you would go back to 2006 to buy one of these for yourself? Or would you have waited until 2008 for the $1,600 headrest mounted version? After you put your answer down in the comments, be sure to check out this video about how I spent over $6,000 building the ultimate shiny hunting setup. The question is, can my army of consoles stand up against the power of a sparkling level 3 sandwich?